As I've been making more progress on my airborne farming simulator, I've started to switch my focus from the more basic features, like collision and movement, to more intricate features that embody what it really means to be a farming simulator. Features like inventory management, day-night cycles, tools to improve your farming efficiency, and much more. I think these types of mechanics, although fairly simple, contribute a lot to making the final product much more engaging. I've actually worked on quite a wide variety of features, and because of the unique nature of my game, I think it would be interesting to take a quick look at them. To refresh your memory, this is the progress I made last time. The material floating in the air is called Cetarium. You can collect it and then deposit it at the Cetarium box in order to earn some money. The main thing I was missing at this point was an inventory system. Technically, there's an internal counter to keep track of the amount of Cetarium you have, but this is hardly sufficient for the final game. What if you want to hold multiple types of items, or have a limit on the amount you can hold? The standard solution to this is having a certain number of slots, which can each hold a single item type, up to a certain capacity. This type of system is used in games like Minecraft and Stardew Valley, and for the most part, I felt that it would be suitable for my game as well. But how exactly should these inventory slots be organized? I could have laid them out horizontally at the bottom center of the screen, but I chose to lay them out vertically in the top left, which actually provides many benefits. First, it saves some vertical screen space, which is especially important in my case since the player has the ability to jump around the environment. It also allows me to put information like the name and quantity next to the item itself, which reduces clutter and improves clarity. And lastly, it makes it easier to expand the number of inventory slots, since you can just add another one at the bottom without changing the rest. This would definitely be useful for when I decide to add inventory upgrades. Currently there are 6 slots, though I may change that number depending on how many items I end up adding to the game. Internally, every slot holds only a reference to a particular item. All of the information about the item is stored separately, like its sprite, and the amount of it you can hold. This makes it easy to assign certain properties to different items, which I'm sure will be very useful in the future. Along with the inventory, I also added the first item, metal bars. Since you're so high up, there's an obvious risk of missing your mark and falling down. Metal bars can help with this, as they can be placed down anywhere to provide additional ground. They're also useful as they provide more areas to collect Cetarium that would otherwise be out of reach. Because of how powerful this item is, I'm probably going to add more restrictions to it, but overall I really like how it turned out. I think the metal bars provide an interesting way to improve your land, just like in other farming simulators, but it's uniquely adapted to this game's setting. That's basically it for this version, though there are a couple of minor tweaks I'd like to briefly mention. The shadows are now twice as wide as they are tall. This is because it better matches the perspective you're seeing the game through. I also made the player able to get tired, so when it reaches 4 AM and you're still awake, you'll pass out and wake up the next day inside your house. I still haven't added the ability to willingly go to sleep though. Now we can finally move on to the next version, and oh boy, there's a lot to cover here. Most evidently, I updated the graphics and layout. Now the house looks more like a house, the deposit box has more shading, and the Cetarium looks like those spiky plant balls that stick to clothes. In the future, I'll probably change the sprites again, but I think working on the graphics throughout development is generally a good strategy, because then you can slowly converge on the best approach rather than doing it all at once. Sort of like sketching out a drawing before adding more layers of detail. I also added diagonal tiles, which combined with the new rocky undersides do a wonder at making the floating islands feel much more realistic. Moving on to the lighting, I finally updated the day-night cycle so that it stays night for longer and there's a period in the evening where the sky is more yellow due to the sunset. The specific color is determined by mapping the current time to a position in a color gradient. I think it looks quite nice, but I'll continue to update it later so that it can look even better. I also updated the clock so that it supports a 12-hour format. 24-hour clocks will still be an option though if you so choose. Furthermore, you can now actually go to sleep whenever you want. Sort of. If you enter your house, you can approach the new bed, and if it's past 10 p.m., you can go to sleep for exactly 8 hours. The reason you can only sleep past 10 p.m. is because I didn't want the player to be able to skip days by sleeping repeatedly. I also locked the sleep duration to 8 hours in order to introduce another element of strategy. Theoretically, you can go to sleep whenever you want within the permitted time, but maybe it's more valuable to stay awake longer to finish a specific task. To make this a more meaningful choice, I'll probably add some time-specific events sometime in the future. Despite all these flashy new additions, I still made an effort to further improve the collision system, and arguably this is one of the biggest changes of the update. I finally implemented the ability for 3D objects to overlap. So for example, you can now stand on top of the deposit box. Like I've mentioned previously, the calculations are actually the easy part, and it's the visuals that cause the most trouble. I really wanted to find a perfect solution, but in the end I had to settle for a few compromises in order to get it working. In the underlying system, objects are essentially billboards, and are drawn in the order of the vertical position of their base. The new change is that the deposit box has its base offset in order for the player to appear on top, even though the box's true position should put it in front of the player. Hopefully that makes some sense. This approach is mostly seamless, but the one limitation is that the deposit box will never be able to properly appear on top of the player. This just means that anything you can jump on top of needs to stay on the ground, but that's a restriction I can deal with. In fact, the main reason I decided to implement this is just because I'll probably want to add low-lying objects like bushes and such, and I imagine it would be really irritating to be constantly stopped in the air by things on the ground. Speaking of low-lying objects, this update I actually added the first tool to help you catch Cetarium. This catcher essentially stops any Cetarium that flies above it, so you can just leave it alone for a while and return a bit later to harvest whatever it caught. Just like the metal bars, it's extremely powerful, so later I'll have to find ways to limit its effectiveness, probably by restricting the amount of stuff it can hold on to. This also puts more responsibility on the player to manage their resources and harvest what's caught in a timely manner, just like other farming simulators. By the way, have you wondered what actually happens if you fall down? Previously you would have just kept falling forever, but now I actually added a special sequence for it. After falling out of the screen, you'll keep falling down for a bit longer, before a bird can chase after you and bring you back to the surface. It's only a small detail, but I enjoyed filling in this gap of content and sort of contextualizing the world a bit more. While I'm talking about random topics, there's also a secret in this game that has to do with the new layout. If you bridge over to the left, you can actually reach a hidden cluster of islands. Obviously there's not much on them, but I like the idea that you can discover new things on your property as you make progress throughout the game. It's definitely something I'll experiment with more as I make further progress. And lastly, there's one final feature I'd like to bring up, and that's the new title screen. Obviously it's very basic at the moment, but I like adding the title screen early because it allows me to set up many of the game elements outside of the main gameplay environment. I actually had to make some adjustments to the text drawing functions so that the menu options can be centered, but other than that it was pretty straightforward to set up. Even these fancy particles were fairly easy to implement. The other thing that stands out here is that the title is hidden. I do have a name in mind, though I'm choosing to reveal the final name sometime at a later date. After implementing all of these features, I decided to just start playing my game for a while, bridging around with metal bars, catching Cetarium from the air, and occasionally harvesting the catchers. And honestly, I quite enjoyed it. I had a moment of realization that the thing I put together actually has some potential and is a worthwhile endeavor. It has that sort of synergy of all the pieces working together that I think makes farming simulators interesting, albeit present on a very small scale. Initially, I wasn't sure if making farming simulators was the best decision, but I think now I have a newfound confidence that this project could develop into an experience that's very enjoyable. As I continue to work on this game, my immediate focus will be on finishing it in the simplest way possible. Unlike my previous projects, this one has a big enough scope that I can't plan it all at the beginning, So I'm going to focus on adding the most fundamental features first, and then adding more layers of complexity over time. And hopefully that goes well. Thanks for watching. Bye.